Good evening. Thank you for tuning in. On behalf of Writers for Democratic Action and Book the Vote, it's my pleasure to welcome you to a virtual evening with Dahlia Lithwick and Siri Hustvedt to discuss the new book, Lady Justice, published by our friends at Penguin Press. Join us as we explore both the legal philosophy that now controls the Supreme Court, its alternatives, and on-the-ground legal activism that can alter the future. I'm honored to introduce tonight's moderator, Siri Hustvedt, a founding member of WDA and the author of a book of poetry, 7 novels, 5 collections of essays, and 2 works of nonfiction. She has a PhD in English from Columbia University and is a lecturer in psychiatry at Weill Cornell Medical College. She has won numerous awards for her work, including the Los Angeles Book Prize for Fiction, the European Essay Prize, and the Princess of Asturias Award. Welcome, Siri.
Thank you very much, Sophie. Hi, there's Dahlia. I have the pleasure to introduce Dahlia Lithwick after many months of delay. She has, I noted, a BA in English from Yale University. She is a writer and a lawyer. Her JD is from Stanford. She's won numerous prestigious awards for her writing on law in the United States, including the American Constitutional Society's Progressive Champion Award in 2018 and a National Magazine Award for her columns in 2013. She's currently a senior editor at Slate, and she hosts the podcast Amicus. Her book, the book we're going to talk about today, Lady Justice, Women, the Law, and the Battle to Save America, entwines stories of particular women and their battles for equality under the law in light of broader jurisprudence. It was mostly written before the Dobbs decision, which overturned the constitutional right to abortion. But the book includes that reactionary decision, and its essential content is not changed by it. As Dahlia Lithwick points out, well before the decision last June, quote, for many women, abortion was a paper right, dependent on race, geography, income, and the courts, end quote. So quite a bit has happened between the time we were first going to talk and now. The prosecutions of some of the January 6th terrorists, the inauguration of Biden and Harris, the strong popular support for abortion, which to my amazement has stupefied many media pundits, and the Supreme Court's shadow docket decision just recently on mifepristone. These are all facts of the recent past. But the deeper philosophical issues, I think, remain the same. So my first question, in light of the deep, I think, significance of the Dobbs decision, I want to draw on your legal knowledge and ask you to discuss originalism. Now, this means a number of things, but as I understand it, the most recent idea and the one supported by Alito is that the meaning of the Constitution is to be understood by ferreting out its public meaning at the time it was written. This theory is not old. It was born in the 1970s and has been written about endlessly by US legal scholars. I've just dipped in a little bit here and there. Nevertheless, it has absolutely no support outside of this particular country. Other countries have not followed in suit. And it also seems to have some kind of public support, widespread public support. So what I want to know from you is your opinion on originalism, why you think it has a popular following, and what might change its mysterious hold on legal thought.
So that's very academic, and I like it very much. And I want to start by thanking Writers for Democratic Action. I want to thank Siri and Sophie. Is the echo only I'm hearing echo? Okay, it's fine. Here's what I would say about originalism. in its best possible construction and in the hands of some of the people who were the prime movers, the idea was one of constraint. The idea was born in response to something loosely known as living constitutionalism, and that was a product of, in some sense, Justice Brennan, Justice Marshall, sort of rights revolution at the Warren Court in the 1960s and 70s. And originalism was meant, in its most charitable incarnation, to be a theory of restraint, a way of saying judges and justices cannot just make stuff up as they go along. And so we are going to cabin the power by saying that when they interpret a statute or the Constitution, they should be limited in the tools that they use. And the tools that Justice Antonin Scalia would put forward at the time were things like original public meaning, exactly what you said, that you look in the dictionary, figure out what the words of the draft or the framers meant at the time, and you're constrained. Fast forward, Justice Scalia dies. Originalism is in its high water moment at the Supreme Court. In fact, Justice Kagan famously joked a few years ago, we're all originalists now, even the liberals, right? When you read the Heller decision about the Second Amendment, even the dissenters are applying originalist methodology. And so in some sense, the war is won. Originalism reigns supreme. But I think under your question is the critique, which is how you do originalism. And what we're seeing from Justice Alito and Dobbs, from Justice Clarence Thomas, emphatically in Bruin, the gun case last year, is a cherry picking. Is saying we're going to pick the dictionary, we're going to pick the year of the dictionary, we're going to ignore all of the other elements of what people meant and thought at the time. So it's not so much a theory of constraint, it's an enabling device to get to certain outcomes and then say, oh, we're just practicing judicial restraint and humility. And so the pointed critique of the historians who read both that one decision and Dobbs last spring, which came down within 4 days of each other, was that this isn't originalism. This is purpose-driven interpretation in which bad history, bad lexicology, and you get the outcome you want. And so I think my take on originalism, if I want to be charitable, is that it was a theory that was meant to limit judicial power. It's now being used to massively turbocharge judicial power without any intellectual rigor.
Yeah. So and then, I mean, I think we can go a little closer then to the Alito decision, which I read several times when it was leaked, and then I read the final decision. They're very, very close to each other. And what I found was I was truly shocked by what I felt as a person who reads a lot of philosophy, how dumb it was. I know you're not supposed to say this. It's a Supreme Court justice, and all respect is given to the position. But I expected it to be more intelligent and more Machiavellian, if you will. I mean, his idea of originalism is to take the Constitution and then move from there to 1868, when the 14th Amendment was passed, focus in on tiny things. I mean, let's face it, the Constitution says nothing about abortion. It's a short and vague document, which has its good sides to it, right? I mean, it's very flexible document. So do you think this is driven by a religious fervor? Do you think that this kind of thinking, including the recent now rant, I would say, call it a rant on mifepristone. What is your feeling about what's driving this?
So you're asking sort of different questions, and I want to take them in turn.
Yes, go ahead.
The first is the utter mystery after the jobs leaked, when actual historians and economists and physicians weighed in on all of Alito's errors. He had the benefit of real-time fact-checking, which most
Yeah.
businesses don't get. And as you said, he changed not a word. He cited Matthew Hale, a famous witch burner, right? Things that he could have tempered or moderated. Instead, what he added to that opinion when it came down in June was hotshot at the concurrence and so to me, the question there is, what was he thinking? And the answer, I think, is just power. You
Right.
don't have to take account of legitimacy or credibility or even change your errors if you have power. And that's really frightening overarching answer to the first bit of your question, which is even if you're going to do originalism and you do it badly and you get checked, you would think that the project would be better served by doing it correctly the next time. He did not. Your second question is really the harder one, and I think it's the third rail of how we talk about the Supreme Court, which is the ways in which religion inflect everything and nobody talks about it. And I would point into people in the Greenhouse's great piece from this weekend where she simply names that.
I read it, yeah.
I think that it's impossible to read Dobbs without seeing it through a stark theological lens. And Alito was clearly planting seeds for personhood amendment, for deeply religiously informed future cases and future takes. And you're quite right, Judge Kazmarek and Amarillo took him up on that and wrote a deeply religiously inflected opinion about Krista. So the question where you're hurting, your second question is, why are we not talking about it in these terms, in these stark religious terms? And I think that is just a piece of malpractice that we have done around the U.S. Supreme Court for decades. It's the reason Amy Coney Barrett wasn't questioned about her own writings that she put into the record about the relationship between religion and jurisprudence, and we didn't question her about it at the hearings. And I think that the decision to say by legal academics, by court watchers, by senators at confirmation hearings, that there is something totally improper about viewing this as fundamentally theological means that the conversation is 20 years behind where it should
be. Right. Yeah, I I think that's true because I mean, I wrote about it, but that the soul is haunting the Alito opinion. The idea of you know, when is a fetus ensouled? A very old story in the court. So yeah, well, let's move on because this next question is very this is something that a point you made in the book, and I'm going to quote again because I think it's something that many of us can easily misunderstand. So this is what you write, quote, "The law is a fragile arrangement of laws, norms, suggestions, and rules. It is not, we learned, self-enforcing," end quote. The we learned, of course, you're referring to the wholesale crushing of norms under the Trump administration. But I think, again, many people in the country think of the law as a granite edifice, or as you put it, a timeless, immutable cathedral, end quote. A static reality that can put things right in and of itself, as if it had kind of supernatural abstract powers out there. So what I would love to know is, do you have your own suggestions for enforcement? And what does it look like? You know, we have the Clarence Thomas issue right now, who seems to have regarded himself as wholly free of even the few ethical restraints that there are. So do you think, you partly answered this, to go along with that, does popular opinion really affect the court, and to what degree?
It's such a deep question. It's one I've been thinking about a lot, because Americans, I think we can just agree, are in love with the law. And all the stories about the framers and the founders and, what happened in Philadelphia at the Constitutional Convention. It's like a huge love letter, right? To, we are going to lay down the tracks for a system governed by law, not by men. That was the point.
Yes.
And here we are. And as you say, January 6th, no accountability. Merrick Garland doesn't get a hearing or a vote, no accountability. Clarence Thomas says, I just know, super sorry, fixing my filing, no accountability. And so we have a collision of a deeply law-based norm of governance in this country and a reality that does not begin or end with Donald Trump, which is that there's 2 tiers of law, and that powerful, famous, let's call them men, in many cases, are not subject to the same rule of law that, low-level drug offenders of color are subject to. And so I think in a strange way, and this is what we're seeing as the Alvin Bragg prosecution plays out, and there's this real question, really? You're going to tag him with this like trivial financial record-keeping misconduct? That's how white-collar criminals have gotten away with what they've gotten away with forever. Yeah. And so I think the thing that is really challenging, and it's so manifest in the Clarence Thomas situation in the court, is that we believe we're governed by law, but in fact, some people are tagged for things, and some people are never tagged for anything.
Yeah.
And we, particularly as women, and this is the theme of the book, have both benefited from the rule of law, from equality, from dignity. Yay, we have credit cards since the 70s. This is all good. But women are also subject to unbelievable criminal penalties, even pre-jobs, right? For their miscarriages or for, being pregnant and being on drugs, whatever.
Yeah.
So we live in that split screen where the law is weaponized to harm some people, vulnerable people usually, and is weaponized to immunize some people. And I think if nothing else, the Clarence Thomas story is playing out now. And by the way, his wife was involved in January.
Yes.
He did not recuse himself from the record case around that. He wrote The Sole Descent. This is the thing I think people are waking up to in a deep way. That the sense of the legal system that we're so in love with, we watch Law and Order on a loop, right? We love the morality play of, law making its arc to some kind of redemption. And we're all looking around and saying, oh, wait, some people will benefit from the law forever, and some people will be preyed upon. And jobs can fix, that's going to be women. But in the immigration context, it's going to be immigrants. And in the criminal law context, Donald Trump is not tagged for anything. So I think the harder question is, and this is your question of what we do, we have to do everything we can in this moment to bolster those soft norms, to codify them, to say, as we just did with the Electoral Count Act, for instance, we just hardened the Electoral Count Act. So it'll never be claimed that might just throw away votes and, the counting. Those soft norms need to be reinforced and codified, and all of us can play a part in making sure that the systems of democracy that we thought were robust, that turn out to be just kind of suggestions, need to be hardened.
Hi, everyone. I'm so sorry to interrupt.
Sorry.
I'm so sorry to interrupt, but there's actually an audio issue for you, Dahlia. I'm not sure why.
Yeah.
Now, the green room, it was good, but I guess now it's, in and out.
Yeah, so I've been listening very hard to reading lips too.
I was hoping, you know, maybe the internet would settle in and it would kind of sort itself out. But I think it's best if Dahlia could leave the call and I can just get her back in. Maybe it'll kind of like restart.
Okay, it will be stronger. Okay.
So I'm so sorry, everyone, for the issue. But yeah, let's try to get this sorted out. It'll be just a minute.
Okay. How's that? Are we fixed today?
I hear it a lot better. Do you?
Just talk.
You know what I think I may have been at fault. I think I had two different windows open for the same call, in which case I want to apologize for 18 minutes of gibberish.
No, you're very clear. That's wonderful. Thank you. That's great. Okay. And you were right in the middle of a thought. Well, it was Clarence Thomas. It was codifying, in a sense, codifying or hardening, well, I guess certain laws, and that's somehow the answer to enforcement.
Yeah, I mean, I just think here's how I think about it. I remember in 2016 when Merrick Garland didn't get a vote or even courtesy visits. And I remember people lined up in auditoriums when I was speaking saying, but how can this happen? How is this legal? And it's legal because Merrick Garland said presidents can't confirm a nominee for the Supreme Court in their final year. And then fast forward to Donald Trump mashing Amy Coney Barrett onto the court when voting had already started in 2020. And people would say, but what about that last rule that they put forward about not, it's just norms. And we're seeing it, by the way, in judicial appointments with blue slips, right? Where we have Biden judges who cannot be seated. We're just seeing, the filibuster is a norm. These are just norms. And I think that, and this is a larger point, I'm so glad I have audio back now, but I think it's this larger point about the intersection between law and democracy itself, because we are so enthralled with the idea that law is going to fix everything that we don't realize that a lot of these things are not laws. They're just kind of ideas that we've used to govern ourselves. And so they need to be made into laws. And whether that is, voting rights in the states, whether that's repairing gerrymandering or vote suppression, whatever it is, it needs to be done with the understanding that you can win all the lawsuits in the world and still lose democracy. And I think we're on that knife's edge right now.
Yeah, I mean, the other interesting, more historical question is, of course, this is not the first time we've had a right-wing court. And it's not the first time that we've even had a reactionary court. If you go back, I remember saying to my husband, naive as I was, Bush versus Gore, I said, they have to send it back to Florida because it's a conservative court and they have no choice. And then they make a ruling in which they argue that it can't be used as precedent. Now that's extraordinary. That's, just one example of many where, the question is, what minority was being protected when the Constitution was written, right? It was white men with property. You say this in your book, and you have a variety of women lawyers who said the same thing, right? So that is the minority that the founders were most eager to protect from the tyranny of the majority. Now, we can agree that minority rights is hugely important. pure democracies where you just have, 51 people, hammering on 49 doesn't work out either, right? So we, I guess that's this big question. How do we do it at this knife edge moment? What are you suggesting? We, the non-lawyers, we who care about how this is all going to move forward. Is there something structural that's wrong?
I think that the most important two things you said that I want to lift up are these. One, the system is working exactly as designed, right? Every part of government that is failing to promote majority rule right now is probably some vestigial effort to protect white landowning male, right? So that's the filibuster, that's the Electoral College, that's the wildly malapportioned Senate, right? Every single one of those things is working as it was intended to do, which is to make sure that rural white land-owning men have a thumb on the scale. And so when people say, wait, our democracy is broken, no, it's working as designed. We're just seeing now the ways in which it promotes minority rule at the expense of massive majorities that want gun control, that want environmental regulations, that want women to have reproductive freedom. So that's one thing. And I think that switch that a lot of people made post-Dobbs, which is like, how can you have 80% of Americans not wanting Roe overturned, 75% of Americans want reasonable gun regulations, and the court is batting that down. So that's one answer. This is the more pernicious answer, and it's the thing I would focus people's attention to. We have, at this moment, 5 of the 6 Republican-appointed justices on the court lost the popular election, right? They lost the popular vote. Then they chose Supreme Court justices who were ratified by that wildly malapportioned Senate, so that the 2 senators in West Virginia represent the same amount of people as the 2 senators in New York and California, right? That's minority rule. And then you have these 5 of these 6 Republicans, and in this case, 6 of the 6 Republicans working to further suppress the vote, right? So they're deciding in Shelby County to do away with the Voting Rights Act. They're deciding in Rucho that political gerrymanders are fine. They're deciding the independent state legislature theory, which is literally a case before the court, would scupper the ability of state Supreme Courts to make determinations about whether state election procedures are lawful. So this is like a minority rule trifecta, where you have presidents who lost the popular vote, senators that represent the minority of the country, seating justices who are choking off access to the polling place. And that's all by design. That is a minority rule. So you're exactly right that we have to be mindful of the fact that we need a minority check, right? That's how we get Brown v. Board. That's how we get Obergefell. That's how we got Roe.
Yes.
So you need a branch of government that is promoting minority rights. But when the branch of government that is promoting minority rights is choking off the people's ability to express their will at the polls, something has gone off the rails. And I'll just end by saying this. You ask, what we can do. Justice Alito kind of trolls us in his Dobbs opinion, right? He says, like,
yes,
listen, women are not without, like, sure, they were property and chattel at the founding, but they're not without the ability to, like, express their will at the polling place. But this is the same Justice Alito who writes Brnovich, right? This is the same Justice Alito who's writing opinions that make it harder for people to vote. And so I think what we need to do, and this is why the last 3 chapters of my book are all about voting rights.
Yes.
We have to connect up the catastrophic losses that women, people of color, LGBTQ Americans are seeing in gerrymandered state houses. We have to connect that up to the ways in which voting is broken, and it's broken by design. And we have to spend every second of every day saying, how do we fix gerrymandering? How do we fix vote suppression? What do we do about Senate reform? What do we do about Supreme Court reform? Because those structures, as you said, are not going to fix themselves. And those structures are the reason that a tiny, tiny minority is now calling the shots nationwide.
So the recommendations for activism, I mean, it's clear from your book that you think people going into the streets can be a very important thing. The airport demonstration, for example. And I think now we see that the abortion issue that seemed to elude so many people, pundits, as I said before we went on, not you, but many other people in what we call media seem to not understand that this would be an enormous issue for women in the country. How is that possible? Are they too close to Washington? Or
when we went into the midterms in 2022 and all the pollsters were saying, I don't know, I called a bunch of people, women don't care. They were super mad for a week in June and they're over it. And now they care about the price of gas.
Right.
And like you, I was talking, to the women in Michigan who were putting abortion on the ballot to make sure that it was resolved by ballot initiatives. We know now that in every single state that put reproductive rights on the ballot, abortion won by huge margins.
Yeah.
We know that 2 weeks ago, the Wisconsin Supreme Court race was just a drubbing for the candidate who explicitly said she was for. So we know what voters did. And yet we keep having these Lucy football pollsters telling us that women aren't that exercised. They don't vote on this. They don't care. So I think the answer to your question is, and it's the same thing, by the way, with young people. We were told like, oh, I don't know. They don't answer their landlines. Like I have teenage boys. They don't own landlines. I just think that this is a massive failure, both of polling, but also, and I think you're so descriptively right about this, the idea that, and Rebecca Traister has just written a superb piece about this. It was always an animating issue. It was always an issue that both invigorated and infuriated women. And the fact that people didn't take it seriously, that President Biden couldn't even say the word, that, we didn't codify Roe when we could have, we haven't passed WIPA when we could have. I mean, all these things are not failures of women on the ground. They are failures of leadership to take seriously how much this matters, and the failure of pollsters and pundits, as you say, to recognize that it's serious. And I think that's changed. I really think that we are in a moment of reckoning now. It's part of why we're seeing a national mifepristone ban, because I think that they are trying to outrun women's anger, and that women's anger has proven time and time again since Dobbs to be very, very powerful.
You're hopeful.
People tease me because I am the most cynical, broken, my producer of my podcast says, you're not even Eeyore, you're like a broken Tigger, which is way worse. But I wrote this very hopeful book because what I saw was the template for how you get it done. And in this particular case, it was these handful of extraordinary women who looked around and said, there's no grownups in the room. I guess I'm going to file this lawsuit. I guess I'm going to build a movement. I guess I'm going to, think through how you sue Nazis and white supremacists in Charlottesville. So we know how to do this. We're really, really good at it. And I think that what needs to be married in this moment is all of that will and passion and anger and commitment, and the belief that, and this is super important too. I was joking because I have my RBG cushion.
Yes, I see.
And I really think that for many, many years, we made the mistake of just hero worship, right? If I buy the mug and I buy the shot glass and I buy the RBG earrings, then I'm doing, justice work. And I think we just had to learn this lesson. It's one of the reasons I wanted the book to be a love letter to people we don't necessarily remember as heroes, that we have to counter program the sort of way we've approached activism, not you, but the way a lot of groups have approached activism, which is Robert Mueller's going to save us. And then, Ketanji Brown Jackson is going to save us. And now Jack Smith is going to save us. And then Fani Willis is going to, they're doing their best. but they need us to step in. And I'm hopeful because when we see young people step in Tennessee, holy hell, like they can just lift up the sky. They can do everything. And so I think it's that.
Don't you think part of this too is a very long tradition in the United States that was made worse by the neoliberal agenda, if you will, of, the individual acting alone has extraordinary power when actually it's only in connection with other people that all of this happens, right? We have a tendency to isolate these heroic figures, but actually, as you show so well in the book, these people are working along with others and pushing for, activism on the ground.
It's why the book starts with Polly Murray, because for me, Polly Murray, and I graduated from law school not knowing about Polly Murray, to my great shame, and nobody who's listening should be embarrassed if they haven't heard of Polly Murray, although there should be a Polly Murray library at every law school in America.
I agree.
And Polly Murray is the single most important doctrinal influence of using the 14th Amendment to preserve gender equality and race equality, and history has all but erased Polly Murray's legacy.
Yeah. And she is such an or they, as in people now are saying, because she felt that she should have been born a boy. But I found her through the sociologist Patricia Hill Collins. Mm-hmm. And in Collins's most recent book, which is extraordinary, which is called Intersectionality, she talks about Simone de Beauvoir and Polly Murray together as a kind of dialogical unit of ideas. And it's totally fascinating. I too, she is actually a hero for me too. So everyone should go out and look her up, read about what she did, and maybe we can start a little movement to get recognition where recognition is really due.
I know we have to take questions in a moment, but I would just say this. I found my way to Polly Murray largely from Ruth Bader Ginsburg, who always name checked Polly Murray. Anytime I interviewed her, she would say, I stand on the shoulders of giants, and she would mention Polly Murray. And in fact, Betsy West and Julie Cohen, who made the film about RBG that was this blockbuster success, their next film was My Name is Polly Murray, which is extraordinary, and folks should watch it.
Oh, good.
But I just want to pull on one thing you said, because I think it's the most important thing. And I cite Rebecca Solnit in my book, her great essay, When the Hero is the Problem, because it's so true that we have constructed a sort of narrative fiction about this one guy in the white hat who saves the day. And we're the townspeople in the background being like, my hero. And it's never how social change happens. And certainly not for women and immigrants and LGBTQ Americans and climate activists. Like, it's always ground up, because again, the system is working as designed. And so you have to claw your way into the system. And I think my sense is that when we saw those people go out to the airports in the first 2 days of the travel ban, and I sort of start the book with this because it was so powerful, and they're like divorce lawyers and probate attorneys, they don't know anything about immigration law, and they just show up at every airport holding up signs, right, in like Pushto and Arabic, and saying, I am your lawyer, I'll be your lawyer. Like, that's the energy we are going to need to bring now. Which is, and by the way, you don't have to be a lawyer to do this. Like, that's kind of the beauty of it. It's, I am your sort of democracy pipe fixer. Like, I'm the one who's going to like clean out the pipes and fix this thing up. And I think that energy has always been ground up. And so sort of looking to the skies for, RBG 2.0, like I keep saying, like, there are Ruth Bader Ginsburgs everywhere. And the book was about some of them, but they are everywhere. And in some sense, we are all Polly Murray. We all are doing work and not getting attention, but the attention isn't the point.
Yeah. That's a wonderful place to take some questions for Dahlia. I think Sophie was going to do it. There she is.
Yes, hello, I'm back. Thank you both so much. This was really insightful. To the audience, I just want to thank you guys for bearing with us during this audio issue. So we're going to be moving to the Q&A portion. So if there are any questions in the beginning that you may have missed or any questions at all, really feel free to do so, to ask now. So we're just going to start it off. We have a question from Carmen who asks, what strategic actions to protect rights and freedoms should be taken if a red wave hits the country like a tsunami?
I mean, I think that what I said about structural democracy is the thing that will keep the red wave from hitting. I think that if we take seriously what the numbers show, everything we're seeing about book bans, about denying gender affirming care, I mean, these are issues that people don't find salient, they're not excited about. There are small minorities that are very aggrieved about non-issues. And then there are huge majorities who believe that, you know, healthcare is existential, employment is existential. You know, I think the re-upping support for unions and labor in this country in the last couple of years is breathtaking. So I think the question isn't, you know, oh, they've got huge majorities and we have tiny minorities, like what do we do? I think it's, how did we get to a position where democracy is so profoundly warped that tiny minorities are exerting their will? And so what I guess I would just answer the same thing I answered, which is people who care about those issues should be running for local government. They should be on their school boards. They should be on their zoning boards. They should be running for state and local office in vast numbers. I think we saw the machinery of government captured, and certainly the courts captured, by tiny minoritarian interests.
Yeah.
And so I think instead of waiting around for this tsunami that's not going to come, I think we should say, where's our tsunami and why are we not bringing it? That's my sort of, I think this is eminently fixable.
I completely agree. Another question from Lucy asking, I'm more or less resigned to the Supremes banning mifepristone. Anything we can do to stop them?
I think we stop them. I think that if you had asked me at Friday afternoon at 5 o'clock what was coming down, I actually thought they were going to let Judge Kaczmarek's order or the really bad Fifth Circuit appellate court order go into effect. I think the fact that they pumped the brakes suggests to me, and Siri asked this question, I didn't fully answer it, that the court is a little more attuned to public disapproval than I believed. I thought that the sort of, my friend Leah Littman at Michigan calls it the hashtag YOLO court, right? The you only live once court. They have no braking mechanism. What we saw, I think, on Friday night was a very legible pumping of the brakes. And so what that tells me is that a court that has gotten so far out over its skis, not just on guns, not just on abortion, not just the environment, not just on, you know, doing things on the shadow docket, but also on ethics, on not having a code of ethics for themselves. Somebody there was a fifth and maybe a sixth vote that said, holy cow, we're in trouble. We are contributing to our illegitimacy and we have to stop. And we don't know, based on that order, who that fifth and sixth vote was, if there were only five. But what we do know is that the court listened in a way that I have not seen the court listen in a long time. So my answer is, I mean, we can talk about structural court reform. I think we desperately need it. But I think also the part of me that thought that this was kind of a megalomaniacal, you know, we're going to do it all and we're going to do it now court just blinked. And I think they blinked because the public is outraged. And I think they know that they are risking the entire institution.
Thank you. We have another question asking, how can people join Writers for Democratic Action?
Oh, well, that's easy. You can go to the website, and I think you can join right here online. It says, join Writers for Democratic Action. So please do. Press the button. It's easy.
Please do so. We also have another question asking, what do Southern states do to organize change? I'm sorry, I'm not sure if I understand the question. Let me reread it. The two southern states organize, change the maps. Susan, if you could re-ask the question, just so that I can ask it clearly. I don't want to butcher it. But I actually had a question of my own. What do you suggest, the average American, average voter to do to stay informed about issues like these? Because I feel like to know the extent of all these issues, you have to be very informed. I mean, you're a lawyer, but most people are not lawyers. So I just kind of wanted to know, what do you think, what are the first 5 things you should do to kind of get into it, or, the basics?
So, Sophie, people aren't going to like this, but I'm going to say it, and it's pay for news. That I think we are about 5-6 years away, maybe not even that many, from a moment in which every single piece of news you get for free will not be true. I mean, I think that we're seeing, right, the real news going behind paywalls, the real news being, because we have to monetize news, right? I have to put braces on my kids' teeth. It sucks, but there it is. And so I think one of the first things I say to people, you don't have to subscribe to everything, but you got to pay a little money for whether it's the Atlantic or the New Yorker or, God bless you, Slate.com or the New York Times or the Washington Post. I think people need to relearn the ethos that good fact-based journalism is going to require a little investment. And that's, I know people, like, I know money is tight, but a lot of the news that people are getting for free is very distorted by, the sort of clickbait incentives. So that's one thing. So I would say find your source that you trust, that you think is pretty consistently good about, when we make mistakes, we print that we make mistakes. Like, we're good about fact checking. Everything I write is fact checked. Those things matter. That's the first thing. I would say turning off the stuff that makes you feel hopeless and helpless, so that if you sort of have that cacophony of like, we're doomed, that's really disempowering, because in some sense, that's the point, right? Is to make you feel that there's nothing you can do and that you're paralyzed and that it's so systemic. So I think it's finding your lane. And I said this, but I'll say it again. We can run for office. Women should be running for office. We can support people running for office. Everything we have learned about the Supreme Court is that local government and state constitutions are going to rush in to fill the justice gap. So we need to be like involved in that, not as spectators, but as participants. And I think that our, local news outlets are suffering. I mean, they're laying off writers. That local television is crazy. So we have to really, really believe, and I am the first person to say that I understand why people have lost confidence in journalism. And, we are talking today, like in the hours after Tucker Carlson lost his job.
Yeah.
But I think that we need to be really, really willing to understand that nihilism is the enemy. And saying that, everybody lies and TV is all lies and, MSNBC is as bad as Fox and, journalism is all untrue is part of the problem. So we got to support that which is true and it's still out there. And that might mean remuneration for, journalism and journalists. But I think it just means getting involved and not, again, thinking, as Siri said, that somebody else is going to do this and save us.
Yeah, no, I think, listen, I just want to make one small caveat about what we call mainstream news, the Post and the New York Times, et cetera. There's almost nothing as depressing as going back in time and reading, for example, the New York Times on eugenics, or now the New York Times reporting on genetics, and the close relationship, for example, just 2 examples. These are also vehicles for what I would call forms of distortion of the truth, feeding white middle-class readers what they want to hear at various chapters in the history of our country. So just, skepticism, informed skepticism about, various kinds of news might be a really important thing. And that includes, big media companies that do serious news. One has to read them too with some skepticism, as history tells us.
I completely agree with everything that was just said. I think media literacy is one of the most powerful things we can have, and it's necessary, especially in this day and age. But we do have a lot more questions to go over, so I'm gonna shoot through them all. We have a question from Christy asking, you started to answer whether how can popular opinion affect the court. Can you revisit?
So here's the crazy thing that people don't understand. We get into this mode where we say, oh, we're just doomed, right? We're going to live under the dead hand of the Trump judges, not just on the Supreme Court, but on the federal circuit courts for the rest of our lives, hoping our great-grandchildren do better. Bye. And that's not actually how it works. I think that's a sort of form of learned helplessness that doesn't get us very far. And Siri made the really important point, and I want to say it again. The U.S. Supreme Court, for 2 centuries plus, has been a backward-looking, revanchist, ultra-conservative, property-protecting, white male, like it had a couple good minutes in the 60s. That's it, right? This is not the court that we thought it was when we were like, oh, yay, this is the like Woodstock court. No, it was the Woodstock court for a blink. It has always been conservative. So when I say that it's a choice to believe that there's nothing to be done, it's because it's a choice. It's a choice to say there can be no meaningful ethics reform. There can be no serious conversation about term limits. There can be no serious conversation about, there are proposals, there are bills that have been put forth by people like Sheldon Whitehouse and Hank Johnson that would do all sorts of things to cabin the authority of the court, and people don't take them seriously. And they don't take them seriously for some of the same reasons we were discussing, which is just magical thinking that the court is all powerful and can never change. And so the most important thing I can say to this is that the Supreme Court, by design, and this is, go back and read the Federalist Papers, has neither the purse nor the sword. It doesn't have an army. It doesn't have a budget. If Congress said tomorrow, we're going to turn off all the lights, we're going to block all the toilets, it's over. It's over. Now, I'm not suggesting that, and I don't want to sound like I'm saying we should stop up the toilets. But what I am saying is the only power the court has, the one power that vests in the court, is public legitimacy. And so the public has the ability to say abso-freaking-lutely not. And the public chooses not to do that. The public chooses to behave as though this is a monarchic branch of government. And so I think the single most important thing we can do, and it requires like a brain shift, it just requires not saying like, I am now in thrall for the rest of time to a court that, by the way, like stole one seat and then like stole another. But we can't talk about, adding seats. And I think it would require taking very seriously the people who are putting forth legislation that would say, from now on, every president gets to seat 2 justices. End of story. You retire after 18 years. No other constitutional democracy in the world has a court as powerful as the Supreme Court. So there's things that can be done, but more urgently, we have to talk about those things as though they are actually doable and not as though like some nutter in Congress is proposing it.
So I'm revisiting Susan's question. What do Southern states do to make lawmakers change the maps to make it more equal?
So Susan, one of the reasons the book ends for me on Stacey Abrams is not just because she's awesome, but because she has been working for decades now, quite literally, tirelessly, to revisit the question of Georgia, which should be a purple state, and how voter suppression has operated in that state. And we're seeing that in Wisconsin. We're seeing that certainly in Tennessee. So what we need to do is, I think, follow all of the, whether it is your state, commission that's looking at apportionment and gerrymandering, whether it is state efforts. Right now, they're talking in the last week about stripping students of their right to vote, right? Like, we've seen the massive disenfranchisement, re-disenfranchisement of felons in Florida. So all of these are sort of parts of that dynamic I was trying to lay out before when I was talking in two voices at once and freaking you all out. And that is just the idea that it all has to come down to voting and to understanding that one person, one vote has to be the way this works. And so, we have a huge case out of Alabama, voter suppression case, Merrill, that's going to be decided by the Supreme Court. They are super, super, super good at taking 50-50 states and turning them into 80-20 states. And so the answer to the question is we have to reverse engineer every piece of that, whether it's vote suppression, gerrymandering, taking control. We're now seeing what we saw in Tennessee 2 weeks ago is a state legislature saying that duly elected representatives who represent tens and thousands of people can be stripped of their seats, right? This is all has to be thought of as one single problem, which is distorting the vote, distorting democracy. And it all has to be resolved with this one simple answer, which is if I'm not working every day to make sure that every vote counts, we're going to lose.
We have another question from Robbie saying, I agree with you that gerrymandering is the major point here, but how do we get it to start? I made calls about this issue last year to people in Iowa, and I found them parroting the GOP line on this issue, even when I tried to explain reasonably why they should question those. I doubt that position has changed much. With the Dominion case not resulting in a public apology from Fox, how can we change this view?
Do you want to take it, Siri?
Yeah, I mean, this is about perception and how people, form ideas and beliefs. And there's usually a strong emotional component to it. And listen, I mean, Dahlia mentioned it earlier. I'm glad. I mean, I'm sorry that we didn't get to watch this Dominion case in action. I really am. I think that would have been instructive in lots of ways for many people. At the same time, I'm glad that Fox felt wounded enough to sever ties with that horrible man. And, I think this strange business of trying to talk to someone who has, in a way, emotionally decided about these beliefs, for reasons of security. I have found, I know it's a certain kind of openness and dialogue, right? Saying, could just explain it to me. This can sometimes move people. It really can. But obviously, condescension does not work. It doesn't work ever with any other human being. So remembering the story of another human being, how they came to that place, how they came to love Tucker Carlson or whatever, can sometimes help. And I'm not, is the right wing totally and completely and absolutely stuck, Dahlia? I'm asking you now.
No, I mean, listen, I want to take a shot at, having just said we should do less RBG hagiography. I want to take one shot at answering that question through the lens of what I think of as sort of like the great lost teaching of RBG, right? So we'd like to tell the story of RBG, and it's the 60s and 70s, and she's bringing all these cases, right, for the ACLU Women's Rights Project, right, like the movie, and we treat it like it was a party trick, right? Like instead of finding female plaintiffs who were denied benefits, who couldn't stay home and care for an ailing parent, who couldn't, take care of a child. Instead of finding females, she would find the men, right? She would find these very sympathetic men who just wanted to stay at home and take care of their ailing mother, who just wanted, to do sort of traditionally female things who were married to somebody who was in the military who couldn't collect benefits. And I hate that story so much. And by the way, she hated it so much because it wasn't a party trick. She wasn't doing it to sort of like rope-a-dope male judges into finding white men sympathetic. She did it because, like, from the bottom of her heart, and she kept in touch with these guys for her whole life, by the way, she believed we would be a better world if men could nurture, could cook, could raise their children, could stay home, could take care of their ailing parents. And one of the things I think she was saddest about in her lifetime was that we didn't learn that lesson. We told it as a story of like pushing men down and taking their jobs. Yeah. That wasn't what she dreamed for this country. She really felt like if men could be fully realized, complicated, nurturing beings, all boats would rise. And I say that because I think so many of this year's cases at the Supreme Court come from this myth of scarcity, right? This myth that like your kid is taking my kid's place at Harvard, right? I don't think that Indian tribes should be able to, you know, have the sort of right of first refusal on their children because white people want to adopt them in Texas. Every single case is rooted in this, what you're kind of describing, this fear and this myth of there's only so much good stuff to go around and we have to go grab it. And it's, you know, that's voting, that's Merrill, that's the independent state legislature theory. Every single case is about, I want stuff and you're taking my stuff. And what I want to really reimagine, and I'm not a philosopher and I'm not, you know, nearly as good a communicator as I should be, but I think if we could imagine a world where the ethos is of plenty rather than scarcity, I think we would be much, much closer to Justice Ginsburg's vision, which is not like I want to take guys' jobs, but I want them to feel free, as her husband did, to stay home and raise children and help with the homework and cook dinner, because I think the world would be better. And so what I want to urge on people is that that kind of fear-based thinking, which is, by the way, that's what book bans are, right? I don't want other people's kids to read these books. And I don't want other people's, you know, I don't want libraries to have, like, if you don't want an abortion, don't have an abortion. That's about fear. So I want us to really reimagine this ethos of generosity and plenty that I actually think is the wealthiest country in the world is not hard to imagine. And so what I want to say is, one person, one vote seems like a pretty saleable principle to me. Like, I think it should not be a hard sell to call voters and say, you know what gerrymandering does? It usurps the principle that everybody should have a say in government. And if you're for that, if you just think like some people should get to vote, then I guess you're lost to me. But I don't think these are antithetical ideas to ideas that we have about democracy and freedom and dignity. I just think we've lost the ability to narrate it as a story of plenty and a story of like a rising tide lifts all boats. And so I think, and it goes so well to your shaming point, by the way. I don't think we should be operating from a place of like, you suck and I'm taking your stuff. I think it should come from a place of there is so much richness of opportunity, of democracy, of dignity. Let's try to sell that as an idea. And I think that's really actually the core idea that we lost in RBG's thinking about gender.
Well, one last thing is she kept talking about we the people, that wonderful flourish that opens the Constitution, and how it, to her mind, it was expanding the idea of we the people from white men with property to all of the citizens in the United States. And that was the journey of law for her. And I always found that very beautiful because it is a beautiful flourish, even though we meant something else at the time.
Thank you both so much. We do have one last question for the night. Can you talk about the Comstock's beginnings? How did it become law? How is the GOP planning to use it?
That's good.
So the Comstock Act is very scary. It really dates from 1873, which is sort of the high water mark for anti-vice legislation. And if you go read about Mr. Comstock, he was single-handedly not just trying to sort of legislate porn and the possession of filth and smut. He literally did his job with a gun. Like, he did it at gunpoint. And so when they passed the Comstock Act, it was quite literally an attempt to make sure that the placement of anything that was smutty or filthy by his lights that was placed in the mails would be criminalized. And one of the things that it swept in was birth control. And one of the things it swept in was devices that could conceivably be used to terminate a pregnancy. And the Comstock Act, he took great pride in the fact that he burned books and that he, made it impossible for certain authors to proliferate their work. He was very happy that he drove people to suicide. This was like seen as a win. So this is, again, the antithesis of, the myth of plenty. He was going to decide what everybody in the country could read and use. And it falls out of favor in part, Griswold versus Connecticut, which gave married couples the right, the constitutional right to use birth control, went after a mini Comstock in Connecticut. So the Comstock Act is basically delegitimized by the court in the last few decades, but it's still on the books. And as the questioner notes, it is being deployed, and it shows up in this mifepristol case, again at the Fifth Circuit, as though this is still a good law that will preclude people from, even without intending to, be liable for putting something in the mails. And Mary Ziegler, who's one of the smartest sort of historians of reproductive rights and abortion, has been saying to all who would listen since Dobbs, they're going to use the Comstock Act as a vehicle to make abortifacients illegal nationwide. This is going to be the vehicle by which they will make sure that even in states that protect abortion rights, because every device, right, even a surgical device, it goes through the mails. And so this is really an attempt to sweep in not just abortifacients and abortion drugs, but also to make everybody terrified, to have this chilling effect of, if I put this drug in the mail, am I liable? And she's been saying, and I think she said it on my podcast last weekend, we need to get it off the books, and that can be done. And I think there's a movement afoot to finally fully repeal Comstock. But I think it really goes to, and this was one of Siri's first questions, sort of one of the lies baked into Dobbs was that we're going to get the judiciary out of the abortion business. We're going to let states resolve this. And it is so clear that this is a way to sort of federalize abortion legislation. And it's one that is having the same effect that so much current abortion restrictions have, which is just this chilling effect where everybody's terrified.
Yeah.
And so I think that, is it a stretch to say Comstock could be deployed? A year ago, I would have laughed like coffee out my nose, but now we're seeing it cited with approval at the Fifth Circuit. And I think it is a vehicle that, if they want to breathe life back into it, it says what it says. And so we should be very nervous. But I think the deeper thing I want to say is that it is of a piece with SB 8, the vigilante bill. It is of a piece with so many pieces of legislation that have the effect of not just terrifying people, because that's part of it, but completely isolating the vulnerable person who needs help the most. That's the real sort of vigilante piece of this. That's the part that I think doesn't always get enough attention.
That's really interesting. I did not know that. We do have a little comment from Susan who said, a book recommendation saying there's a good book about the infamous abortionist, Madame Restel. It gives you a view and understanding of what we went through as women and threading in today's news in 2023. So if anybody's interested, go check that out. But Siri, Dahlia, thank you both so much. Writers for Democratic Action, thank you. It's really been a pleasure. Despite the audio issue in the beginning, I really think this was an extremely insightful conversation, and I'm so grateful to have been a part of it. So thank you both so much.
Thank you, Sophie. Thank you, Dahlia. Thank you so much.
Okay, so I'm going to be ending the podcast now, but everyone have a good night or wherever you are.
I will.
And so bye, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye. Bye-bye. Thank you.